All right, so we are entering the gender section of the course, and we're going to study men and women in business. And this first week is what you might call the traditional critique of patriarchy, the traditional critique of men dominating business and not giving women a fair shot. And so this is found in the Gibson chapter on gender. Then the following week, we're going to look at challenges to this notion and some authors who actually say women now have the advantage and now dominate the professional world, or at least are beginning to go in that direction. Okay. So, with regard to the traditional critique of women being discriminated against and women having a more difficult time advancing in the professional world, Gibson starts off and he notes that from a historical perspective, women really began entering the workforce in large numbers with the advent in the beginning and the duration of the world wars, where you had large numbers of men having to go off and fight, and that required the jobs that they had previously occupied to be done by women. And that this entrance, especially in World War II, it wasn't undone when the men came back. It was a foot in the door, and that resulted in gains to where we are at today. But he talks about, if you look at it historically, there was a period where women were not in the workforce, and then they were. But if you were to roll back time, if you were a patriarch, a sexist, and said, look, I don't want women in the workplace, they don't belong there, they have no business being there, so on and so forth, then what would happen? And Gibson raises the interesting point that countries and societies that are very patriarchal, where the women can't enter and they can't be members in public life, political or business, in that regard, those countries tend to suffer. Those countries tend to do worse. And one very obvious reason why is because you're losing out on productive and good workers. There are certainly very many good female workers, just like there are many good male workers. And there are certainly poor female workers, just like there are poor male workers. But when you only allow one half of your population into the workforce, you're losing out on a lot of good, talented people. You're losing out on a lot of people that could contribute to society, to the business, and help grow the economy. And so, that's why, one of the reasons why, for example, Western societies have tended to do better. The other problem, and this is an interesting kind of issue, is that if you are very sexist or any kind of ism, racist, against homosexuals or something like that, the free marketers say, okay, you want to be racist, you want to be sexist, you want to go against gays or something like that, that's fine. It's your prerogative. It's a free market. You don't have to serve them, but you're going to pay a cost. You're going to pay a cost in what is a kind of a hidden tax, a discrimination fee. Because if society has deemed these attitudes to be inappropriate, and you as a business go out there and do them, then you are going to be looked down upon. You may gain some ardent kind of hardcore supporters that believe in your ideology, but ultimately you're going to lose large portions of the population, and your business is going to be less successful. So if you tried as a business to eliminate women, that reputation is going to get around, and it is very likely that your business is going to suffer. So from a free market perspective, yeah, go ahead. Don't let women in. Be sexist, but you're going to pay a cost. From a more governmental controlled perspective, they would want to say, no, we're going to end this. We're going to force this business to change. And it's interesting when you come to some of these social issues, which one do you agree with? Do you think it should be a government intervening and regulating these businesses so that they adhere to social norms? Or should the social pressure on these businesses come from consumers who essentially say, if you don't abide by these social norms, we're not going to buy from you? Certainly Friedman would like the free market. Okay, so when you look at the traditional critique of businesses being patriarchal, which just means kind of male-dominated and inhospitable to females, what are some of the reasons that people say that women are discriminated against? And you could think to yourself, what those reasons might be. But here are a few that Gibson mentions. One, he says earnings. and this I'm sure is probably known to you, that women make less. They earn a lower proportion of the wealth that is created through business. The figures can vary a little bit, but in general, it says women make about 75 cents on the dollar per men. Women also represent 2/3 of part-time work, and they're overrepresented in low-paying jobs, and in general, they receive fewer benefits. So the idea here, and this is the whole equal pay for equal work movement, is that women do work, and yet they are not given the same kind of financial rewards and compensation. And so that is a form of discrimination. If you're doing the same thing and you're not getting paid the same, you're not getting the same kind of compensation, well, then you are being discriminated against. In terms of another area, so one area of discrimination is this idea that women earn less. Another area is this idea that women are restricted to a narrower employment range. So women don't enter into as many fields. Their employment options are fewer. And women tend to be dominant in categories such as elementary school teachers, nurses, clerical work, service occupations, so on and so forth. That's where you tend to find most women in the workforce. Whereas men would have a broader variety of options to choose from, women would not. Although it is, just kind of to think for yourself. Is that true? Do you believe that? I mean, not many men are nurses, not many men are elementary school teachers, and you might say that men who would enter that field would have a big advantage, particularly in elementary school teachers, because male role models are so wanted. And why is it that men don't enter those fields? Perhaps their own employment range choices are also restricted by some sort of social pressure. But even, and Gibson mentions this, but even when women enter kind of traditionally male fields and traditionally high-paying, high-power fields, such as medicine or law, they tend to go on a particular tracks. So for example, with medicine, it tends to be women tend to dominate and be much more present in pediatrics. With regard to law, it tends to be much more kind of family law, representing estates, so on and so forth. In medicine, they tend to, again, be pediatricians or rehabilitation specialists with regard to that. And so the question you have to ask yourself is that a function of a systematic bias? Is that evidence that the system is rigged, that it is discriminatory against women? Or are these simply choices that women make, and that women make choices to go into these fields because, for whatever reason, that's what they find attractive? Another area where you could say women face discrimination, the idea of housework. So in many families, both parents work. Certainly that's true of my own family. But in those families, women tend to do their job, but they also tend to do a larger percentage of the housework. I know that's true in my family, no doubt about it. Whereas men could be happy, going to work, staying at work late, focusing on a project. They're not going to be as invested in the day-to-day kind of familial operations, the day-to-day upkeep of the house. Again, obviously there's exception. There's some men that do a tremendous job in this regard, but many men do not. And certainly a larger percentage of two-parent households, the housework is going to be increasingly done by women, the majority of it. And so you could say that's a form of discrimination, that women have to work and do more at the home. And that can drain people. It can create bitterness, create jealousy, it can create a sense of unfairness. And then finally, you talk about traditional areas of discrimination: lower pay, narrow employment range, women, even when they work in a two-parent, two-person working household, tend to do more of the housework. The final one is this idea of the glass ceiling. And the glass ceiling essentially says, look, there's a limit to how far a woman can rise. And they get to that limit, and there's a ceiling. It's glass. It doesn't appear. It's not visible, but it is there, and it stops women. Gibson gives the interesting, stat where he says, I forget the exact years, but essentially in 1970 or something like that, 50% of the managers at a lower level position were women. But then when you look ahead 30 years, only 3% or 5% of CEOs are women. So in that period, you would think, all things being equal, 50% that started off as managers would then become, 50% of them would become CEOs, but that's not the case. There are a few women in that kind of high level, high position of power. And there's also kind of evidence and certainly arguments that when women do start to move up the ladder too quickly, or they do start to get to higher level positions, and a certain number of them get to that position, there's a backlash. And there's a sense that there's something wrong here. Women should not be, have this much power. And so people kind of resist it, and progress is halted. There's also a term called the glass cliff. And the glass cliff refers to a situation in when women are given these highest power, highest position, a lot of times they tend to be riskier positions where there's a greater chance of failure. And so it's almost like you put the woman out there. Okay, you want your job, you want the CEO, you want the power, but you put them in a position where there is a greater likelihood to fail, whereas men would not be put in that position quite as much. Okay, so you have these sources of discrimination. Why don't women speak up more? Why don't they change the system? Why don't they force their will upon the business world? And Gibson identifies a number of reasons why they might not. One is fear of speaking up. The sense that women tend to be viewed as weaker to begin with, and if you speak up, you might view yourself as just complaining, and other people, you're gonna think they're gonna see you as weak and whining, and just begging for something that you didn't earn. And so because of that fear of playing into this perception that women are weaker, there's a chilling effect in terms of actually speaking up. There's also this idea of gendered project lines. Women oftentimes are put on project lines with less profit potential. For example, if you enter retail, women tend to be put on cosmetics as opposed to appliance sales, whereas the appliance sales are the bigger ticket items, the place where you could earn a greater commission. And then finally, another reason why women might not speak up is that similar behaviors would incur different categorizations, different judgments. So, for example, a man that is very tough or driven, aggressive, might be viewed as tough, driven, and aggressive, a go-getter, someone who won't take no for an answer. Whereas a woman with those same characteristics would be traditionally considered a bitch. Someone who is maybe insecure and just needs power. And so these same attributes that are exhibited in men could be judged differently with regard to women. And knowing that could be a reason maybe not to be as aggressive, not to speak up as much. Now, one of the things that I want you to look at this week is this woman, Marissa Mayer, and she's in the news many times. But one of the things she became really famous for was that she became Yahoo's CEO and was pregnant when she got the job. And she said, I'm only going to take a 2-week maternity leave. And she said, I'm going to be right back to work. And I'm actually going to be working during the maternity leave. And this raised some very fascinating reactions. And there's going to be a sheet where you're going to see on the discussion board some of these reactions. And they're basically taken from the comment section on an article about her. And the reactions are fascinating because some people say, that is absolutely wonderful. You go, girl. Women can do anything. It's your life. Live it as you please. You can be just like a man. You can be just as tough. You can just get right back to work. Others are very critical and say stuff like, look, this is wrong. You're betraying your child. You're all about being career rather than doing what you should be doing, which is caring and bonding with your child in those precious few weeks after delivery.